really clearly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so to start with, we're going to take you on a little journey. So I'd actually like to invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, and to just take 3 deep breaths in your own time, consciously and with care. To take a moment to feel the edges of your skin welcome in the environment. You may like to trace the edge of your body with your hands, slowly or with pressure. Now we invite you to sink. Sink deep within your seat, within your feet. Feel your body held by the earth. And sink into the stories of place. Take a moment to contemplate all that this land has seen and bore witness to. These are the stories, histories, and memories of country that are embedded in the soil that sustains us and the lifeblood of earth, water. I would like to acknowledge the many different countries we have traveled from and through in our arrival to this place together. I come to you from Gadigal country, and I pay my respects to the traditional custodians of these lands, waters, and skies, the Gadigal people, and elders past, present, and emerging, and extend a warm thank you to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends joining us here today. I'll now pass over to Bronwyn.
Thank you, Lleah. Yes, as Charles said, my name is Bronwyn Bailey-Charteris, and I'm a curator and educator. And I just wanted to say thank you to ACUADS for hosting us today. This is my second time presenting in this conference, and it's lovely to be back. So as Charles mentioned, I have a specialization in the poetics and politics of eco-aesthetics with a special focus on water, hydrofeminism, and curatorial practice. And I am at the tail end of my PhD at UNSW in curatorial theory.
So hi everyone, my name is Lleah Smith, and as we heard throughout beautiful introduction, I acknowledge myself as a pedagogical practitioner. My practice is shaped by these 3 modes of being, which I won't repeat because you've heard. But today's presentation will be really grounded in this question that Bron and I have been tackling together, which is how does participation and pedagogy take place within the robust conceptual framework of the Biennale, and how does the method of brewing within this public pedagogy affect these interactions?
Exactly. So we're going to kind of share some reflections and some analysis specifically around the role of water in pedagogy. And we'll be coming at it as curators and as participants. And we'll consider the role of water, especially hot pots of shared tea, as a method for eliciting meaningful engagement in artistic pedagogical pursuits. And we're going to be using the Anti-Symposium, which was a 3-day workshop held as part of RIVUS, which was the 23rd Biennale of Sydney, as our starting point. And we're going to consider ways of thinking with water and the role of brewing, particularly as a way for mediating experiences in art, materially and metaphorically.
So to just kind of start with, I guess, an awareness of what RIVUS is, in case it is new to you. The 23rd Biennale of Sydney RIVUS was articulated around a series of conceptual wetlands that were situated along the waterways of the Gadigal and Burra peoples. These imagined ecosystems were populated by artworks, experiments, activisms, research, programs, and experiences. And it's important to acknowledge this because it truly was a holistic endeavor into imagining and reimagining how biennales can work with and within community and place within these temporary activations. So with an exhibition at the heart, which we can see in this beautiful map that was one of Jose's earliest. He's an architect, so it's the way that he really likes to think. You can see that the title of the exhibition shifted slightly. It initiated with Weeding Water. But we have all of this beautiful thinking that is channeled and encouraged to filter outward to inform all aspects of the Biennale encounter, including the programs, resources, publication, and digital comms that circle back to the exhibition at the heart. So RIVUS was realized by a curatorium that was a collective endeavor led by Jose Roca, the artistic director of the 23rd Biennale of Sydney, and an expansive local team. It's important to really sort of mention that Jose saw himself as an equal in this process and just one of 5. And my role in RIVUS was to really collaborate with Jose and the curatorium to facilitate the integration of key curatorial concepts into this beautiful place that we call the Waterhouse, which was our dedicated programming and learning space. And through the Waterhouse, I think one of our key philosophies was really to try and acknowledge the site, the object, and living organisms and humans as teachers. And this was intentional. It It was an effort to flip the narrative from one that is passive, the learner, to one that holds agency, the teacher. And Bron will situate us within the watery narrative of water and agency in a moment.
Exactly. So kind of alongside Lleah's engagement with the Biennale, I really approached the Biennale as a researcher, specifically as a researcher of curatorial practice and water. So for me, it was very exciting that this was all happening and I could contribute as well. So what I thought I'd do now is just introduce a little bit of my PhD research, just because it kind of makes a framework for us to consider the Biennale. And, you know, especially this idea of brewing as a wet methodology. So in my PhD, I'm proposing a new term, which is the hydrocene, and I'm proposing it as both a watery epoch enacted in practice and also as a kind of watery curatorial theory. I won't go into all of it today because it's a whole thing, but it is relevant here as I've been researching the theoretical offerings for thinking with water, and this is especially prevalent in kind of feminist environmental humanities as a way to radically realign human-water relations and move beyond capital colonial logics of water as resource. So in my PhD, I'm arguing that water in art is a guide, archive, and mediator. And that art can contribute to this cultural discourse on the climate crisis through water. And so my thesis presents an alternative to the limited notions of the Anthropocene, instead arguing for the Hydrocene, the age of water. And the theory of the Hydrocene as both epoch and curatorial theory examines and centers water-based eco-aesthetics in the current crisis. So I'm particularly interested in how water moves through bodies internally and at the same time links bodies to planetary circulations of the hydrological cycle. So in this way, water is both ingested and planetary. It's both physical and metaphorical. So in my doctoral research, I write about how this plays out within this zeitgeist of art going into the blue, of which Rivers, it's an incredible example of that. And this new wave of water-based art practices that I'm naming the Hydrocene. So again, the Hydrocene is a curatorial theory. Specifically, I'm utilizing a research methodology that attempts to collaborate with water. So it attempts to find water-based methods for understanding kind of water-based works, if that makes sense. So this understanding of the logics of water is drawing from and the work of feminist phenomenologist Astrida Nemanis and her kind of incredible essay, Water and Knowledge. And she kind of really argues that water has these kind of powerful logics and ways of knowing. She writes, water has other manners of being and becoming, other movements and ways of organizing bodies from which we might also learn. So she names these modes of watery relations hydrologics as a way to name the knowledge that bodies of water articulate and the patterning that bodies of water perform to transform and exchange with other bodies of water. So Nemanis kind of lists these hydrologics, and the list reads a bit like transferable skills on a CV. So like communicator, they're up here, yeah. Conduit, memory keeper, sculptor, differentiator, lover, scribe, alibi, genealogist, and saboteur. So for Nemanis, hydrologics are never immaterial metaphor. Instead, she gently reminds us that hydrologics are lived by us as they seep through the choreography of the hydrological cycle, and they're always experienced materially and metaphorically. So in my work, I'm really embracing Nemanis's argument to pay close attention to hydrologics as a way to respect and attend to the various water bodies in which we are immersed, as she says, and as which we ourselves exist. And so it's kind of with this framework and this kind of, you know, look that I come to thinking about this idea of brewing. And so together, Lleah and I, we're really looking at the concept of brewing as a new hydrologic or as another offering within hydrologics, and to see brewing as a practice that both acknowledges and extends and celebrates the knowledge of water. It also, you know, recognizes water's own agency and the pools of knowledge that water gathers together in art experiences. Over to you, Lleah.
Great. So now we're going to sink into the anti-symposium and think through how it connects to this concept of brewing. And Bron has very generously provided us a really expansive framework to reimagine the Anti-Symposium and the endless potentials that emerged from this process of being together, which a lot of us have tapped into today. So the Anti-Symposium Arts Pedagogy as Social Practice was grounded in an exploration of educator practice as a form of relational and social work. It was imagined with and through water as a direct response to rivers and the manifestation of my current research interests. So thinking beyond the human-to-human encounter within the pedagogical sphere has always been a personal site for curiosity. And this is inclusive of site, object, and all living organisms that we are in continual communication with. So the Anti-Symposium was held across 3 days from March 24th to March 26th, 2022 within the Rivers Public Program schedule. And it invited educators from all spheres of practice, including primary and secondary schools, community, tertiary, arts and cultural environments, to contribute to a pond of ideas and sharing practices, experiments, and critical dialogues together. So there was an intentional questioning of who the educator is and how they define themselves, the implicit power structure that we're often grappling with between art and education, and how, whether consciously or unconsciously, the facilitation of a learning experience can parallel the creation of an artwork. So more than simply applying artistic ways of working, by acknowledging the learning environment as a site for artwork creation, we push at the edges of what constitutes art and how we can classify material. So these sessions were led by artists, academics, and pedagogical practitioners, and the Anti-Symposium was grounded in specific theories and projects, commencing with Pablo Helguera on day one, who's the Professor of Arts Management and Entrepreneurship at the College of Performing Arts at the New School, and the former Director of Adult and Academic Programs, Department of Education at MoMA. And Helguera introduced his theory of transpedagogy, which is defined as a focus on the pedagogical method as an extension and sometimes at the very core of the artwork. Stephanie Springay, Director of the School of Arts at McMaster University, generously gifted her concept Feltness for day 2, which emerges from affect, queer, and feminist theories and is described as an intimate practice that touches. Sensuous and affective, Springay evocatively connects feltness to mothering and othering, described as a violent, sticky, erotic, swollen temporality that is always a tiny ripple at the edge of the sand and simultaneously an enormous wave. And on day 3, we had the great pleasure of being with Angela Foley through a place-based pedagogy called Curriculum, based in Naarm, that aims to connect the Moreland Primary School with the Merri Creek and the Melbourneian waterways more broadly through a series of Wurundjeri knowledge, art, science, and sustainability residencies. So for us at the Biennale, it was important for each pedagogue to follow a daily framework that was developed internally by us. This enabled participants to gain informal knowledge into how prompts and provocations can be activated differently through various pedagogical lenses intended for different audiences in different contexts. It was the framework created by the Biennale was inspired by artist Asad Raza's Schema for a School in 2018, which was an experimental school program that launched at the Ljubljana Biennale in 2015 and brought to a prelude to the Shed in New York in 2018. So although tea and food were always central to the experience of the Anti-Symposium, by rippling with Bron through her watery research, new potentialities emerged. Brewing as both material and metaphor unfurled a new way of making sense of an intuitive process that significantly shaped the ways in which we gathered and the flow of the dialogical exchange. Initially, the tea was conceived as a tool for rooting and grounding, but the ingestion of water, material, and memory facilitated something much more than that, much looser and far more emergent. Thanks, Bron.
Exactly. So as Lleah described, this tea serving was really central to our experience of the Anti-Symposium. And here I'm speaking from the perspective of a participant, and I was there also as a researcher. So I was, interested when I was there, but also reflecting, I was considering the moments where the knowledge of water itself kind of broke through, especially considering the theme of the Biennale. And there was this moment of rupture, as Lleah and I have named it, which came on the second day through this beautiful large ceramic teapot you can see in the photo there. It's bulbous, heavy and smooth. And we know we had these beautiful teas that had been suggested by the different facilitators. So Pablo Hulguera suggested a beautiful herba mate with this kind of earthy grounding qualities, and a white willowback for its anti-inflammatory temperament. Stephanie Springay offered a dandelion root for stimulation of the heart and increased blood flow. And she also offered a ginseng tea for its energetic nature. On the last day, Angela Foley connected us with country and story of a locally grown lemongrass and ginger offering. And so we had this tea kind of at different stages of the day as kind of a moment of communal reflection. And as you can imagine, with all workshops, you know, the first kind of few hours, it's always, and perhaps even the first day or two, is always a little bit polite. You know, people are kind of playing these educational, institutional roles. So there's the artist, the intern, the researcher, the photographer, and it's a bit hard to shake sometimes those roles that we kind of turn up with. You know, but the brews kind of helped us to enjoy that, but it didn't really break through anything. But then on the second day, we were all outside and we were looking at the harbour and we were waiting for this kind of now expected pot of tea. And there was this really interesting little rupture where the ginseng had been overbrewed. And so there was this bitter taste. There was this bitter taste of this deeply brewed ginseng, and it was earthy, soily, mushroomy, dank, sour, unpleasant. It made mouths screw up and noses curl. And in this moment, suddenly this kind of brewing rupture began, because everybody had a descriptor for the unease of the moment. This kind of bitterness of this overbrew became this instigator for opinion. And it kicked off this kind of bodily allowance and experience that then translated into the symposium itself, this thing we're calling a rupture. And, you know, the bitterness of the teas and the wetness became a site for potentiality within the group, because we shared this overbrewing, and the atmosphere really did shift quite dramatically from kind of semi-polite, semi-performative to kind of that feeling, you know, when you're at a party and the best room is in the kitchen. It was a bit that same kind of feeling, like everyone kind of just settled in and they suddenly had things to say, and, you know, it kind of sparked memories of other brews that had gone terribly, and there were moments that kind of just critically leaked into this. And of course, like, it may have happened just through time, but I think durationally it would have needed a lot more time to get to that point if we hadn't have had this kind of force of this kind of brewing, the overbrewing incident. So yeah, it really propelled us into this kind of collective response of consumption. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of what happened there with the ginseng.
Thank you, Bronwyn. It felt like we were there. So the final stage of this presentation we're calling leaky care. And we have a beautiful quote here, but it basically says that it is through relationships with all living entities, human and non-human, that we discover much about ourselves. Much of who we are and how we learn is relational. And so we argue that to build relation with and between the human and more than human world need not be detrimental to the development of critical discourse and discomfort, which is often assumed within the world of relational. Whoa, sorry, can someone please mute? I'm crazy feedback.
I think it's Nicholas. Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Back. Oh yes. So within the world of relational pedagogy, it's often assumed that this potential for critical discourse is compromised for the sort of feeling of safety and comfort, which we tend to disagree with. So we suggest that through brewing, it could be quite the opposite. The brew conceived as a moment of intimacy, a familiar gesture that we enact with those that we love, transferred to those that we barely know, allows conversation to flow differently and with ease. With the watery brew traveling from the pot to the cup to the mouth into the body, we follow the same route of water between all bodies and unlock a sense of knowing and of shared experience over a cuppa and built trust. So for us, to build relation is to build trust and cultural safety in a space of difference. And therefore it is relationality that allows the capacity for honest dialogue to emerge and for generative learning exchanges to undulate with waves of potential. We accentuated the mouth as a site of knowledge making and the body as a site for tacit felt knowing and becoming. And through the irregularity of lids on a handmade Chinese medicinal teapot that allowed water to leak from the vessel over tables, papers, and people's shoes, leaky errors offered permission for messiness and failure. And so this performative gesture was anything but perfect. It was just something that was enacted with love and care. So to close, I guess our reflection is that the anti-symposium through Bron's hydrologic brewing, we felt like we were able to decentralize ourselves for a brief moment and to absorb the new knowledge made accessible by water, through water, slowly across time like an overbrewed brew. And through both material and metaphor, the brewing process set into motion deep relational exchanges between humans and the more than human participants in the anti-symposium, thus forging a path for the development of respectful, trusting, and critically engaged group dynamics with all living entities. Thanks for brewing with us, everyone.
Thank you.